Intro animation. Flashing red alerts graphics. Subwoofer boom beat. Urgent. High energy. Recurring script beats stand at the corner of Yan'an East Road and South Tibet Road in Shanghai on any given morning and look south toward the Huangpu River. The tower rises above you in a sweeping monolith of ultra-clear glass and titanium-coated steel. Its lower 12 floors still tightly wrapped in the heavy-duty green nylon netting and zinc alloy scaffolding that scream one thing to every passerby. The work is not finished. The building carries a massive chrome-plated emblem on its facade that you recognize immediately. Not as a domestic real estate conglomerate, not as a state-owned infrastructure bureau, but as a hyper-luxury automotive legend. The Dragon Martin Residences, the very same name that appears on carbon fiber supercars, costing more than an ordinary citizen earns in 3 decades of grueling labor. The same name synonymous globally with elite British manufacturing heritage, precision aerodynamic engineering, and the absolute cultural myth that perfection is not an accident, but an unyielding discipline. Now pan the camera down. Look at the monolithic base of that 66-story superstructure. Look at the subterranean retaining walls of the 4-level underground parking complex. Look at the shears. Look at the deep, water-weeping structural cracks, splitting the load-bearing concrete wide open. If you are watching this channel for the first time, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Every single video on this channel exposes multi-million-dollar architectural nightmares, megastructures that structurally should not exist in their current state, yet stand completely unresolved while the billionaires, developers, and licensing executives responsible for them remain entirely untouched. And this Shanghai ultra-luxury disaster may be the clearest, most flagrant example of corporate brand shielding we have ever uncovered on the mainland. Graphic flyover. 3D blueprint render of the Shanghai waterfront, the Dragon Martin Residences, at number 300 Bund Riverside Way, was announced to the global elite in 2017. The primary entity pushing the project was Huaxing Business Developments, a premier megacity boutique firm heavily controlled by Shanghai tycoon Wang Guanhua and Shenzhen-based venture capitalist Chen Long. Their pitch to the ultra-wealthy was intoxicatingly direct. A soaring, 240-meter-tall sail-shaped residential skyscraper perched right on the soft, prime alluvial banks of the Huangpu River, heavily branded in an exclusive, multi-decade partnership with one of the most revered racing marques on the planet. Units inside this vertical fortress of privilege were listed at eye-watering prices, starting at $3 million for basic 2-bedroom layouts, and rocketing past $75 million, depending on the floor plate and panoramic configuration. At the absolute apex of the spire sat the Emperor Triplex, a mega penthouse spanning 3 entire structural floors, carrying an ungodly price tag of $75 million. It promised an infinity-edge glass pool suspended over the city skyline and an armored, multi-car sky garage accessible by a high-speed, heavy-load private vehicular elevator. The cheapest entry-level micro-studio in the lower tier cost more than an average household in mainland China will accumulate over generations of work. Montage, archival glossy marketing clips, engine roars. The marketing blitz was relentless. The tower wasn't just a building. It was structurally framed as an automotive product. The iconic wing emblem was cast into the lobby marble, stitched into the Italian leather wall paneling, and frosted onto the custom floor-to-ceiling double-glazed windows. The brand's signature vocabulary, obsessive metallic accents, bespoke carbon weave, and deep racing greens, completely dominated the high-end sales galleries in Luzhui, and the buyers swooped in. They came from the tech-booming boardrooms of Shenzhen, the mineral-rich mining hubs of Shanxi, and the old-money enclaves of Hong Kong. They wired massive, non-refundable down payments. They signed highly restrictive pre-sale contracts. Many paid the full balance up front before a single cubic meter of structural concrete had even been poured above the Huangpu River waterline. By the time the slipform climbing framework reached the upper mechanical floors, over 390 premium units had been pre-sold. The total aggregate capitalization of those pre-sale contracts weaponized a staggering $1.2 billion. On paper, it was one of the most wildly successful luxury residential launches in modern Chinese real estate history. construction wrapped up mechanically in late 2022. The Municipal Housing Bureau issued temporary occupancy permits, and the wealthy buyers began taking legal possession of their keys. But within less than 90 days of the first residents moving their custom furniture into the sky mansions, the illusion shattered. The first warning signs arrived via urgent WeChat owner groups. Water intrusion. Tropical rainstorms and heavy seasonal monsoons were forcing millions of gallons of water directly through the exterior window frames and the structural glass curtain wall. The building envelope had failed to seal. In a high humidity, river-facing climate like Shanghai, severe water intrusion is a catastrophic structural event. Moisture trapped within high-end drywall and composite insulation systems breeds toxic black mold instantly. Remediation inside a completely finished, occupied luxury skyscraper requires ripping out tens of millions of dollars of custom-imported woodwork, disrupting structural cores, and forcing billionaire tenants to evacuate. Owners who had shelled out fortunes began posting horrifying videos online, deep water staining creeping across pristine silk wallpapers, damp pooling on custom hardwood floors, and raw physical evidence that moisture was traveling horizontally through the core plates of the building along lines it was never engineered to face. But that was just the surface failure. Then came the structural engineering reports. The lower-level subterranean parking garage, engineered to stabilize the massive weight of the tower above it, began to visibly deform. Heavy cracking ruptured across the primary load-bearing columns. These were absolutely not standard shrinkage hairline cracks that typically manifest as concrete cures and settles over time. These were structural shear fractures. Some ran diagonally along heavy tension members in jagged, multi-millimeter geometric patterns that private structural inspectors immediately flagged as an active structural emergency. Photographs shot by terrified valets and residents began leaking across domestic forums before being scrubbed by moderators. The images revealed a foundation basement that looked less like a five-star billionaire enclave and more like a failing civil engineering bunker under immense uncalculated stress. And then, the third, and most terrifying, anomaly emerged. A quiet, creeping structural failure that is almost completely invisible from the street, but profoundly apocalyptic in its engineering implications. The 66-story tower was showing definitive, measurable signs of major differential settlement. The building is sinking unevenly into the earth, and as the soft, saturated delta soil beneath one side of the massive foundation raft compresses faster than the other, the entire $1.2 billion monument to speed and luxury has begun to tilt. Hit subscribe, because in Part 2, we are diving deep into the hard engineering telemetry, the exact millimeters of displacement, and the secret soil reports that prove this structural nightmare was entirely predictable. Sound effect, deep underground rumble, concrete cracking audio reverb, graphic, on-screen telemetry display showing millimeter of displace. To truly grasp the scale of the structural crisis unfolding inside the Dragon Martin residences, we have to look past the Italian marble lobbies and descend deep into the earth, straight into the highly complex, unforgiving science of Shanghai soil mechanics. This is where the marketing hype stops and the brutal laws of physics take over. When you build a super tall structure weighing hundreds of thousands of metric tons, you are playing a high-stakes game with the geology beneath your feet. In a city like Shanghai, that geology is inherently treacherous. Unlike the hard, ancient bedrock of northern industrial hubs, the ground beneath the Bund and the Pudong Delta consists of incredibly soft, highly saturated alluvial silt and clay, millennia of river deposits from the mouth of the Yangtze. It is functionally an underground sponge. To anchor a 66-story skyscraper into this subterranean marsh, engineers cannot simply dig a hole and pour a foundation. They must rely on deep foundation engineering. For the Dragon Martin residences, the architectural blueprints specified an incredibly dense grid of over 500 high-strength, friction-based driven concrete piles, pushed more than 70 meters deep into the earth to reach more stable strata. On top of these piles sits a massive, 4-meter-thick, solid concrete foundation raft, designed to distribute the colossal downward weight of the tower evenly. But according to leaked structural telemetry data, obtained by independent engineering analysts. Something went catastrophically wrong with the load calculations or the execution of that pile-driving network. The tower is experiencing what civil engineers call severe differential settlement, the ultimate nightmare of high-rise construction, animated X-planar, side-by-side graphics showing uniform, vs. differential set. Let's break down the math, because the numbers are terrifying. In standard megaproject construction, uniform settlement is completely normal. A building settles into the ground by a few millimeters or centimeters over its first few years as the soil compresses under its immense weight. As long as the entire foundation drops at the exact same rate, the structural frame remains perfectly safe. But differential settlement means the building is sinking unevenly. On the northern waterfront side facing the Huangpi River, the soil is compressing at a dramatically accelerated rate compared to the southern side facing South Tibet Road. The telemetry sensors embedded within the structural core plates indicate that the northern edge of the foundation raft has dropped an astonishing 48 millimeters more than the southern edge over a rolling 12-month period. In the world of super tall structural engineering, a 48 millimeter differential shift over that surface area is not a minor deviation. It is a structural code red. When one side of a 240-meter tall concrete and glass tower drops faster than the other, it introduces a massive, unintended rotational leverage effect. The entire skyscraper acts as a giant lever farm, multiplying the force of that tiny foundation tilt as it moves up through the structure. At the 60th floor, that 48 millimeter deviation at the base translates into a permanent, measurable horizontal lean of over 32 centimeters out of plumb line alignment. Think about what that means for the materials inside. A skyscraper is designed to channel its immense weight straight down along its vertical load-bearing columns. When the tower tilts, those forces begin shifting sideways, forcing millions of pounds of unintended diagonal stress onto components that were never designed to handle shear loads. This explains why the 4-level underground parking garage is tearing itself apart. The primary structural columns, thick cylinders of high-density concrete, reinforced with high-tensile steel rebars, are being subjected to severe bending and twisting forces. The jagged, diagonal fractures splitting the garage walls are classic shear cracks, manifesting at precise 45-degree angles. This is physical proof that the foundation raft is warping under uneven geological pressure. The concrete is literally screaming under the weight of the tower. Montage. High-speed text, scroll of leaked Chinese engineering. The paper trail reveals a frantic, behind-the-scenes war between the developers and the city's municipal oversight bodies. In late 2023, the Shanghai Municipal Commission of Housing and Urban Rural Development dispatched a special team of senior forensic structural inspectors from the East China Architectural Design and Research Institute to conduct an emergency site audit. Their preliminary field notes, which found their way onto private engineering forums before being rapidly scrubbed, noted that the rate of water seepage through the garage retaining walls was directly correlated to the opening of these structural fractures. The river water from the nearby mudflats was actively forcing its way through the cracked foundation, creating a high-pressure underground leak that was washing away the surrounding subsoil, further accelerating the uneven sinking of the tower. When the municipal inspectors threatened to revoke the building's structural safety certification, the developers, Huaxing Business Developments, scrambled to cover their tracks. Tycoon Wang Guanhua and investor Chen Long hired their own team of corporate structural experts from a private firm in Shenzhen to issue a counter-report. Their defense was a masterclass in corporate obfuscation. They argued that the 48 millimeter displacement was merely an extended geological stabilization phase, claiming that the soft delta soil would reach natural compaction equilibrium within 24 months. They dismissed the massive garage fractures as non-structural cosmetic microfissures caused by thermal expansion and regional groundwater fluctuations. But while the billionaire developers traded legally dense, contradictory engineering reports with municipal bureaucrats, the wealthy residents of the tower were left trapped inside an active structural failure. The uneven warping of the building's concrete core began to manifest inside the multi-million-dollar apartments themselves. Owners on the upper floors started reporting bizarre, unsettling anomalies. Heavy custom-engineered bedroom doors would slam shut entirely on their own, pulled by the subtle slant of the floor plates. High-end marble floor tiles in the kitchens began to crack in straight, geometric lines as the subfloor shifted underneath them. The most advanced, double-glazed glass curtain wall panels, worth tens of thousands of dollars each, started making loud metallic popping sounds during high-wind events, a terrifying sign that the outer aluminum structural grid was being compressed out of its square frame by the twisting of the building's skeleton. And through this entire brewing catastrophe, as the lawsuits began to pile up and the Municipal Housing Bureau intensified its structural monitoring, the one entity that every single buyer trusted above all else, maintained a cold, calculated, and legally airtight silence. The British automotive giant whose name adorned the lobby, whose corporate colors wrapped the elevators, and whose brand identity was weaponized to extract $1 billion from China's elite, completely vanished from the conversation. Hit subscribe, because in Part 3, we are going to look at how this exact brand licensing scam has triggered architectural disasters across other elite residential developments in China, and how global corporations use fine print to abandon buyers the second the concrete starts to crack. Saffect, distant reverberating explosion, dramatic brass hit, graphic, map of mainland China highly measure, luxury, high, rise, defect zones. To understand why the crisis at the Dragon Martin residences is not an isolated incident, but rather the structural manifestation of a systemic rot across the ultra-luxury real estate sector, you have to look at the broader landscape of modern Chinese megaprojects. This tower is merely the latest, most high-profile casualty of a dangerous architectural trend that has been sweeping across Tier 1 riverfronts and coastal developments from the Pearl River Delta to the Bohai Economic Rim for the past 20 years. Major domestic real estate conglomerates, like Quoxing Business Developments, have operated under a hyper-accelerated construction playbook known as high-turnover manufacturing. Under this model, speed and marketing cachet take absolute precedence over long-term geological stability. To extract maximum premium value out of a plot of land, developers realized they needed more than just structural concrete and glass. They needed an elite emotional hook. They needed a luxury brand shield. This gave rise to the brand licensing boom that reshaped the skylines of Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou. Suddenly, residential high-rises weren't just residential high-rises. They were marketed as lifestyle consumer goods manufactured in tandem with international automotive marques, Italian fashion houses, and elite European jewelry dynasties. We saw the Porsche Horizon spire rise along the coast of Shenzhen's Nanshan district, the Armani Silk Tower pierce the skyline of Chengdu, and the Fendi Emerald Block dominate the high-end riverfront of Guangzhou. Automotive brands vs. Architectural engineering risk in every single one of these elite developments. The marketing strategy was identical to the one used for the Dragon Martin residences. Ultra-wealthy domestic buyers were led to believe that by purchasing a unit inside these branded towers, they were investing in the legendary mechanical precision, rigorous quality control, and elite structural engineering of the brand whose logo sat atop the entrance. But this is the fundamental lie of the entire luxury real estate industry. The structural engineering community across mainland China has long warned about the profound disconnect between a building's aesthetic branding and its foundational reality. In a scathing peer-reviewed report published by the China Academy of Building Research, structural forensics experts noted a recurring pattern of structural compromises in super-tall luxury towers, built on reclaimed land, and soft alluvial basins. The report highlighted how developers frequently compress the critical soil consolidation phase, a process that should naturally take months to allow groundwater to displace under controlled weight, in order to meet tight pre-sale delivery deadlines enforced by institutional financiers. Look at what happened in 2021 with the infamous structural resonance disaster at the Seg Plaza in Shenzhen. That 70-story super tall began wildly shaking, sending waves of panic through the district, because its upper architectural elements had entered a state of low-frequency aerodynamic vibration that matched the natural frequency of the tower. It wasn't caused by an earthquake or a typhoon. It was a fundamental failure of structural engineering dynamics, a mismatch between the building's massive physical envelope and the aerodynamic forces acting upon its crown. When you look at the Dragon Martin residences through this historical lens, the engineering failure becomes painfully clear. Huaxing Business Developments was so focused on hitting its targeted $1.2 billion pre-sale cash injection that they rushed the subterranean foundation cycle. The soft, waterlogged alluvial clay banks of the Huangpi River demand an exhaustive multi-stage pile driving and soil stabilization protocol. If you push ahead with pouring a massive 4-meter-thick concrete foundation raft before the underlying friction piles have fully bonded with the deep earth strata, you introduce a fatal structural variable into the base of the tower. Animated timeline, Shanghai multi-year geological compression raw, and the results are exactly what we are seeing today. Differential settlement that is actively tearing the building skeleton apart. This isn't just an inconvenience for the ultra-wealthy residents living on the upper floor plates. It is an active threat to the civil infrastructure surrounding the entire site. As the northern edge of the 66-story skyscraper continues to compress the Huangpi mudflats at an accelerated rate, it is generating massive lateral soil displacement underground. Local civil engineering from the Shanghai Municipal Construction Commission indicate that the subsoil displacement beneath the Dragon Martin Tower has begun to exert uncalculated mechanical pressure on nearby municipal assets. Underground water mains have experienced minor ruptures, and structural engineers are monitoring the concrete retaining walls of the adjacent subway line tunnels running just a few hundred meters away. The building is behaving like a massive sinking wedge driven into the fragile soft soil crust of the city. Yet, despite this compounding engineering catastrophe, the corporate lawyers representing the British automotive marque have remained utterly untouchable. They did their job with a precision that far exceeds the engineering of the tower itself. The trademark licensing contract was specifically engineered to insulate the parent automotive company from any structural, civil, or financial liability on Chinese soil under the terms of that agreement. The car company was paid millions of dollars in flat design fees and percentage royalties purely for the use of its intellectual property. They provided a team of aesthetic consultants to choose the color palettes of the lobby, recommend the carbon fiber trim for the elevator cabs, and curate the marketing assets used to seduce buyers in high-end mainland sales galleries. But when it came to soil testing, pile driving calibration, concrete density verification, or water envelope sealing, their contractual involvement was exactly zero. The buyers thought they were purchasing a machine-built monument to precision. What they actually bought was an ordinary, rushed real estate gamble wrapped in a multi-million-dollar marketing shroud. Hit subscribe, because in Part 4, we are going inside the tower to hear the personal stories of the wealthy mainland owners who risked their fortunes on this branded illusion, only to watch their luxury sky mansions become unsellable, structurally compromised glass traps. Sound effect, wind howling through high-rise canyons, sound of metallic struts popping under intense tension graphic. Interior drone footage showing rainwater
streaming through gaps in luxury curtain walls.
To truly understand the human cost of this billion-dollar engineering failure, you have to look past the macro statistics and the corporate press releases. You have to step inside the warped, damp corridors of the tower and look at the reality confronting the families who poured their life savings into what they believed was the ultimate symbol of success on the Shanghai waterfront. Let's talk about Mr. Li Xian, a prominent tech entrepreneur from Hangzhou who made his fortune during the early waves of China's software boom. In late 2018, seeking a secure, prestigious asset to preserve his wealth and establish a base for his family in Shanghai, Li visited the hyper-exclusive sales gallery in Lujiazui. He was presented with a glossy, gold-embossed brochure detailing a 420-square-meter sky villa On the 48th floor of the Dragon Martin residences, the sales agents, trained to project an aura of absolute mechanical certainty, explicitly linked the structural integrity of the building to the elite precision of the supercar marque. They assured him that every pane of glass, every load-bearing column, and every structural joint would be subject to the same rigorous quality control protocols that govern the assembly of a $1 million track-focused hypercar. Seduced by the promise of effortless perfection, Li did what hundreds of other wealthy mainland buyers did. He signed a restrictive pre-sale agreement and wired the full purchase price of $6.5 million directly to Waxing Business Developments before the foundation piles had even finished driving into the soft Huangpi silt. For 4 years, as he watched the concrete core slowly ascend through the Shanghai smog, he believed he had secured his family's architectural legacy. Image. Dramatic interior, showing lacquer cracks in custom plaster walls, and water-tapped mant. When Li finally received his keys in late 2022, the initial impression was breathtaking. The panoramic views of the Bund and the winding river below were unmatched. But within 90 days of moving his family into the Sky's mansion, the structural fairy tale dissolved into a living nightmare. It began during a severe summer thunderstorm. Li noticed water pooling along the baseboards of his master bedroom, which directly faced the river. Upon closer inspection, he discovered that rainwater wasn't just leaking through a faulty window seal. It was actively being forced through the structural joints where the aluminum curtain wall system met the concrete slab floor plates. The building envelope was flexing under the wind loads in ways the ceiling membranes were entirely unable to accommodate. Within weeks, the moisture trapped within the multi-layered insulated walls turned into a massive infestation of toxic black mold. The dampness spread horizontally through the custom silk wall coverings, destroying expensive artwork and causing his young children to develop persistent, severe respiratory issues. Li spent over $120,000 of his own money hiring private contractors to rip out the ruined high-end drywall, only to discover that the raw concrete structure underneath was perpetually damp. The building was literally sweating river water. Graphic diagram of the tower showing the upper floor's tilt and cable trajectories. But the true horror revealed itself when Li noticed the subtle, insidious physical manifestations of the tower's differential settlement. One morning, his wife placed a spherical crystal paperweight on the solid granite kitchen island. Instead of remaining stationary, the ball slowly accelerated across the counter, rolling toward the northern corner of the apartment before dropping off the edge. Li bought a precision digital laser level. When he projected the beam across his living room floor plate, the telemetry confirmed his worst fears. The floor was slanting by nearly 4.5 centimeters from south to north. The structural core of the building was warping, and the entire 48th floor was tipping toward the Huangpi River. The spatial distortion began to impact the mechanical functionality of the apartment. Heavy, custom-fitted sliding glass doors that weighed over 200 kilograms became permanently jammed in their tracks because the structural frame had compressed into a trapezoid. The ultra-high-speed elevators serving the upper residential tiers, engineered to travel at a blistering 8 meters per second, started automatically shutting down during high wind events. The structural shafts had become slightly misaligned due to the foundation tilt, forcing the elevator guide rails out of their strict vertical plumb line and triggering emergency safety sensors that marooned residents on lower levels for hours. Montage. WeChat groups chats scrolling rapidly. Owners discussing emergency. Laswitz. The story is identical for Ms. Zhang Wei, an investment banker who purchased a lower-tier unit on the 18th floor for $3.8 million. Her apartment sits directly above the structural transition zone where the tower's massive vertical columns meet the parking garage roof plate. For Zhang, the anxiety isn't just about ruined aesthetics or jammed doors, it is about existential safety. Every night, as the ambient city noise dies down, Zhang describes hearing deep, metallic groaning and popping sounds emanating from the core walls of her apartment. These are the sounds of structural steel and concrete under immense, uncalculated tension, fighting against the uneven sinking of the foundation raft 70 meters below. when the photographs of the wide shear fractures in the underground parking garage leaked into the owner's private WeChat groups. Panic swept through the building. Residents realized they were sleeping inside a multi-ton concrete pendulum that was slowly tilting out of equilibrium over a soft, saturated geological sponge. In mid-2023, a coalition of 45 furious owners, led by Li Xian and Zhang Wei, took a step that is incredibly rare and highly complex within the mainland legal landscape. They filed a massive, coordinated civil lawsuit against Huaxing Business Developments, alleging severe construction defects, structural negligence, and total breach of contract. They demanded full financial restitution, the immediate revocation of the building's temporary occupancy permit, and billions of yuan in consequential damages to cover the cost of structural remediation and property diminution. Text player. Real estate illiquidity and property value collapse, but, as any veteran corporate attorney in China will tell you, construction defect litigation involving super tall megaprojects is a brutal multi-year war of attrition. Cases of this structural complexity, where the legal arguments turn on highly technical disputes between opposing expert witnesses regarding soil mechanics, pile friction coefficients, concrete core stress distribution, and waterproofing membranes, take half a decade to crawl through the specialized civil courts. The lawsuit, filed years ago, remains entirely unresolved as we move through 2026, with the next major evidentiary hearings delayed until late 2027 or 2028. In the meantime, the buyers are completely trapped. Real estate at this scale is inherently an illiquid asset, but a multi-million-dollar sky mansion inside a tower with documented structural settlement complaints and active public litigation is functionally worthless on the open market. No premium real estate agency in Shanghai will list the units. No banking institution will approve a secondary mortgage for a potential buyer looking at a building wrapped in green structural netting and scaffolding. Sellings means accepting an absolute, catastrophic financial wipeout, a loss of capital so massive that it would devastate even a highly successful tech entrepreneur or investment banker. The keys they receive do not admit them to an elite oasis of luxury. They admit them to a structurally compromised glass cage whose value is plunging towards zero, while the structural cracks continue to widen. Hit subscribe and drop a comment below. In our final segment, Part 5, we are going to look at the future of the Dragon Martin residences, the terrifying engineering solutions required to stop a sinking 66-story skyscraper, and the ultimate destiny of this billionaire playground that is slowly drowning in the Shanghai silt. Sound effect, low mechanical hum, metallic clang echoing in an amble chamber graphic, diagram of skyscraper base, showing underground hydraulic. Jenks system, we have reached the final, most critical question of this multi-million-dollar engineering disaster. How do you save a sinking 66-story skyscraper? When a 240-meter-tall vertical fortress built on the soft mudflats of the Huangpi River begins to tilt unevenly into the earth, you cannot simply patch over the cracks with cosmetic plaster and hope the problem goes away. You are locked in a direct, high-stakes battle against the unyielding laws of physics and the volatile geology of the Shanghai Delta. Civil engineers specializing in high-rise forensics point out that the options for correcting severe differential settlement in an occupied super tall tower are extraordinarily limited, technically perilous, and ruinously expensive. The primary engineering solution used to halt a tilting megastructure is a highly complex process known as structural underpinning. To execute this, engineers would have to drill completely through the existing 4-meter-thick concrete foundation raft from inside the lower levels of the subterranean parking garage. They would then need to drive dozens of new, ultra-high-strength, steel-jacketed micropiles deep into the earth, pushing past the unstable alluvial silt layer until they strike a significantly harder geomechanical stratum over 80 meters down. Once these micropiles are anchored, a network of heavy-duty, synchronized hydraulic jacks must be installed beneath the building's primary load-bearing columns to physically lift the sagging northern edge of the tower back into plumb line alignment. Animated X-planar. Visual representation of structural underpinning risk. But let's look at the absolute logistical madness of executing a major underpinning operation on a structure of this scale. The Dragon Martin Residences is a fully completed, massive skyscraper with hundreds of high-value residential units. The immense hydraulic pressures required to lift one side of a 66-story concrete core risk introducing massive, secondary structural stresses into the building's upper skeleton. If a single hydraulic jack experiences a pressure failure or a millimetric calibration error during the lifting phase, the resulting torsional twist could instantly shatter thousands of custom double-glazed curtain wall panels up the facade, sever primary mechanical risers, and permanently compromise the structural integrity of the entire tower. Furthermore, the noise, vibration, and total disruption of the utility infrastructure would render the multi-million-dollar sky mansions completely uninhabitable for months, if not years, forcing a mass evacuation of China's wealthy elite. Because an active engineering intervention carries such an astronomical risk of catastrophic failure. The more likely future scenario for the Dragon Martin Residences is a protracted state of managed structural imperfection. Behind closed doors, Huaxing Business Developments and their legal representatives are banking on a passive geological phenomenon known as soil consolidation equilibrium. They are hoping against hope that as the heavy northern edge of the foundation raft continues to compress the underlying river silt, the soil will eventually become so compacted that its bearing capacity naturally increases, causing the uneven settlement rate to decelerate and eventually stop on its own image. Zoomed-in view of scaffolding coating the upper and facade of the tower but. While the developers wait for the geology of Shanghai to fix their engineering mistakes, the tower remains trapped in a legal and structural purgatory. The heavy green nylon construction netting and the zinc alloy scaffolding wrapped around the lower 12 floors have become a permanent monument to corporate deflection. Day after day, workers perform low-level, cosmetic remediation, injecting high-pressure polyurethane grout into the leaking garage fissures to slow down the groundwater intrusion, and resetting the jammed aluminum tracks of the shifting window systems on the upper floors. It is the architectural equivalent of putting a bandage on a structural bullet wound. The regulatory shadow over this entire disaster has grown intensely dark, following the catastrophic Champlain Tower's south collapse in the west. And closer to home, the heightened national safety directives issued by the China Ministry of Housing and Urban-Rural Development. High-rise structural safety monitoring has reached an unprecedented level of scrutiny. Municipal housing bureaus across Tier 1 Chinese megacities are no longer willing to look the other way when a luxury tower shows signs of geometric displacement. The building is now under continuous real-time laser telemetry monitoring by the China Academy of Building Research, with automated sensors tracking every single millimeter of vertical and horizontal shift. If those automated sensors indicate that the differential settlement rate is accelerating rather than stabilizing, the municipal authorities will be forced to take the ultimate regulatory step, issuing an absolute, mandatory occupancy ban. If that trigger is pulled, the Dragon Martin Residences will transform overnight from one of the most exclusive addresses on the Bund into the world's most expensive vertical ghost tower, an unsellable, unlivable, 66-story glass monument to unmitigated corporate greed and rushed engineering. Music cue, dramatic, slowed down electronic. Walk back down to the edge of the Huangpu River and look up at that soaring glass sail. The chrome emblem of the elite automotive mark still catches the afternoon sun, gleaming with the false promise of precision manufacturing and uncompromising excellence. But beneath that multi-million-dollar marketing shroud lies a stark, unyielding lesson that every luxury real estate buyer in China must learn before it is too late. A high-end brand name on a lobby wall is not a structural warranty. It is not an endorsement of the concrete mix. It is not a guarantee that the foundation piles were driven deep enough into the delta mud. When the ground beneath a mega project begins to fail, the elite international brand will wrap itself in the fine print of its licensing contract and completely vanish into the legal fog, leaving the buyers entirely isolated to deal with the structural consequences. The scaffolding is still up. The sheer cracks are still widening. The corporate lawyers are still billing by the hour. And deep beneath the glamorous facade of the Shanghai waterfront, the billion-dollar tower is still sinking. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, leave a comment with your thoughts on this branded real estate illusion, and share this video. We will see you on the next investigation.